Everybody, welcome back. You know, my goal in sharing these videos has been to either introduce you to Procreate if you haven't tried it yet, or to help you get better at Procreate if you're already using it. But it occurred to me the other day that everything I'm sharing with you is a real-world job, and I hope that lends some credibility to what I'm teaching. But I haven't told you much about the jobs, and I think it might be interesting just to give a little background before I get into the video, tell you who the client was, how much of a rush it was, why I chose to use Procreate and maybe not Rhino or Sketchup. So I'm going to try that this week, and I hope you enjoy it. And let me know in the comments below if this is something that is helpful to you. So this is a job we did for a major Hollywood studio. They wanted us to help invent a chain of virtual reality theaters that can be installed in typical mall spaces. The design was supposed to include room for queuing up and buying self-serve tickets with iPads, something similar to what you would see at an Apple store. Room for having a snack while you wait for your virtual reality experience. That would double as a place to sit and talk about what you saw after the experience. And a retail store so you could buy a souvenir and share the experience with someone back at home. As far as what the design looked like, we were asked to design a space that evoked a sense of mystery and wonder and exploration. So we looked at famous museums and the personal libraries of some famous explorers and vintage movie posters, anything that would give a sense of excitement. Then we put it all together and came up with a lobby for buying tickets, a pre-show and after-show lounge where you could get a bite to eat and a beverage, and a retail gift shop so you could buy a souvenir and share your experience with friends and family. Like most of my jobs, the trick was to generate a concept quickly, win the approval of the client, then hand it off to the staff to do design development in Rhino or Revit. In other words, we wanted to sell the client on the idea, but not get bogged down in details. So when you look closely at the drawings, the detail is really just a bunch of impressionistic gestures that suggest the content, but don't represent it photorealistically. This is the great advantage of hand-drawn sketches and Procreate in specific, because you don't have to draw every single detail, you can just suggest it. So here we go. Step 1 was to import the basic view made in Rhino. Step 2 was to add this very crude sketch on trace that we had made in a meeting prior to starting to design this thing, indicating the content and all the major pieces we wanted to be sure to have in the room. The first step after this was to redraw those pieces in a better perspective, so the eye of the observer would be engaged more in the drawing. I'm using the Narinda pencil for this to give the line work a very sketchy look, almost like a regular pencil. I also began to add things like beams in the ceiling, or extra pieces of furniture, like this bar cart in the back, things that would make the plan work better. I'm trying to create a variety of textures using big things, small things, to keep the eye moving around, keep the composition interesting, but always with an eye toward how the space will actually be used. So here again, more stuff on the walls. Now the beams weren't quite what we wanted at first, so I'm going to add more of a traditional beam ceiling. Once the pencil sketch is far enough along, I'm going to use the flat brush to start adding tone. For me, applying shade and shadow is what lets me start to see the potential of the sketch, kind of pushing and pulling the different parts of the design. It also really helps me imagine the lighting, which we'll show more about in a second. So here I drop another semi-transparent layer of white over the sketch, and then do some design development in red on a new layer. This is a technique you've seen me use all the time on my real-world jobs, where I'm essentially using a new layer of white, just like you'd use tracing paper back in the day. I want to use the kind of shelves you might see in a laboratory or a scientist's office, so I use the grid brush to draw a piece of a grid, and then I transform that piece on a new layer into the proper perspective. Now, you've heard me say this 100 times, but I can't stress how true it is that you really want to learn to be impressionistic and suggestive with these details, at least when you're doing this kind of conceptual design sketch. because all that matters is that the sketch be in perspective, and the human mind and the observer's eye will do the rest of the work for you, filling in the details. When I get to the end of a design change or a design modification like this, I'll throw in a layer of opaque white behind the part that I've changed so I can visualize that better, eliminate the confusing background, and eventually I can turn this red part of the sketch, I can desaturate it and turn it into black and white like the rest of the sketch. So it's a great way of keeping things straight. Another strategy I'll use while developing these concept designs is to keep the colors very limited, maybe only to 1 or 2 colors that emphasize one particular feature of the design. And in this case, I'm referring back to one of our inspiration images, one of these museum images, where, whether true or not, it seems like very often these display cases have kind of a beautiful blue glow to them, and that the little objects are placed in front of that glowing blue. So we went for this effect here, and it was really a simple case of creating a new layer, filling it with blue, and then beginning to erase away the kind of accent lighting or the main points of light that you would see in a normal museum experience. Another trick I find myself constantly using, and I don't have a specific example here, but you can see all this tone I'm putting in. It's usually on one layer when I'm working very quickly, but I can duplicate that layer at any time to give it much more punch, and that has saved me so much time over the years I can't tell you. So another great thing about layers, because if this was watercolor or pencil, it would be very difficult to do that same thing as quickly, but another fantastic reason for using Procreate. Now, at the very edge of the drawing where it's closest to the viewer, I'm trying to throw in a little more specific detail, because that will also serve to trick the eye into thinking that all the detail is a little more specific. At this point in the drawing, I want to look a little bit more at the lighting effect I'm after. It's an effect of kind of romantic backlighting with moments of brightness. So I darken that overhead bulkhead, the top part of that shelf, and I'm using the airbrush, the soft brush, to just stroke in some white. And I'm not being very careful about it. I'm just trying to make areas glow. I don't care if it goes a little bit over some of the things in the foreground. I can always darken them later to get that backlit effect. But in general, I'm punching up the lighting and the details, and this is the part of the drawing where I really begin to get excited. I can see the drawing, I can imagine where I'm going to put more emphasis, where I'm going to make it more dramatic in terms of darks and lights, and it's a great feeling. And it makes adding the detail all the more fun, because really the bulk of the work has been done now, and every new detail just adds that much more zing to the drawing. And the difference between drawing this way and designing this way, and designing the way I used to on using watercolor on paper or using pencil on paper, I can't tell you how liberated I feel having layers at my disposal and being able to individually go back in and delete layers or adjust layers or duplicate layers. It's just so much more powerful than old school analog drawing was, and it really has made all the difference in my career. I'm happy to report the design was well received. The client did not go ahead with the project, but we got it to a point where it was ready to be developed in Rhino. And this is typical for this client that I work with, where we will kind of create the vision first by hand, and then they will actually work backwards from that delivered vision. And it's kind of a huge shortcut, rather than having to develop all that photorealistically, one step at a time. And you can imagine how much detail that would require. We can do these drawings and these designs manually, almost like we're sketching on paper. And then when the client approves that, we'll work backwards. And it's a terrific way to integrate the enduring appeal of hand drawing with important technological advantages of modern digital practice in architecture. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'm going to keep doing these things, so let's have some more fun together. Bye-bye.